Welcome to Part 3 of Social and Leadership Video 6D in our contemporary review of society. In Part 3 of this video narrative, we will pick up from where we left off in Part 2, where we were talking about worldwide terrorism. On the screen is a world map showing where ISIS has attacked directly, or surrogates linked or inspired by ISIS have conducted terror attacks. In yellow are countries which ISIS has declared as provinces of their self-proclaimed world caliphate, and outlined in red are nations where ISIS is actively conducting military operations. Quite a lot of activity for a group referred to as only a JV team. The New York Times produced these two charts in 2016, demonstrating the number of deaths ISIS has caused in their various terror campaigns. The charts run from the fall of 2014 through mid-2016. Chart A depicts the number of Westerners who have been killed, the area of the terrorist incident. The size of the bubble graphically displays the number of people who have been killed. Chart B depicts attacks targeting non-Westerners, mainly in the Middle East and Africa. In November 2016, ISIS executes 52 young men in Mosul in a public school. Then, 6 days later, on November 8th, ISIS executes over 300 civilians, again in Mosul. These 300 committed no crime. They simply were innocents who refused to fight for ISIS and its depraved ideology. 3 days later, on November 11th, 2016, ISIS kills again, executing by gunfire or beheading a total of 73 human beings, and justified on the basis of treason, information leaks, using a cell phone, or having a SIM card in their possession. A day later, on November 12, 2016, ISIS attacks Pakistan, blowing up a shrine crowded with women and children. 55 are killed and 102 wounded. On November 18th, another 40 people are killed and 60 wounded in Iraq, as a policeman's wedding is targeted by a car bomb. Then 3 days later, another suicide bomber kills 30 in Afghanistan at a mosque and injures 35. On December 11th, ISIS strikes in Cairo, Egypt. The bombing targets Coptic Christians attending a mass in St. Peter's Church, next to the main Coptic church. 25 are killed and 49 wounded. Then just before Christmas, ISIS attacks Germany. On December 21st, ISIS kills 12 and wounds 48 at the Berlin market. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2016, ISIS kills 39 and wounds 70 at an Istanbul nightclub in Turkey. On January 6, 2017, the Fort Lauderdale, Florida airport is attacked by a lone gunman sympathizing with ISIS. 5 are killed and 8 wounded. Israel is attacked 2 days later on January 8, 2017, as a truck rams into Israeli soldiers in Jerusalem. 4 are killed and 15 wounded. On March 22nd, ISIS strikes London, England, killing 6 and wounding 49 at Westminster, the center of the British government and meeting place of the House of Parliament. Then, in an especially evil suicide bombing, ISIS attacks the Ariana Grande concert on May 22nd, killing 22 and wounding 119. The bomber detonates in a crowd of youths at the Manchester Arena. Britain and the civilized world was shocked, as children, defenseless and innocent, were specifically targeted by a 22-year-old British-born Muslim who was a declared ISIS foot soldier. On May 25th, the Philippines gets struck by a terror group there with links to ISIS, killing 21, beheading some of the victims, one the local police chief, and raising the black ISIS flag as they seized the Catholic priest and burned several buildings. A day later, on May 26th, a team of 10 armed ISIS gunmen ambushed a bus in Minya, Egypt, carrying about 50 Coptic Christians on their way to a monastery to pray. 35 are killed and 26 wounded. Children are amongst the casualties. In Egypt, the ISIS hatred for Christians is pronounced. Between December 11th and May 26th, as you can see on the screen, there are 4 specific ISIS attacks on Christians in the country, killing 112 innocents. These aren't combatants on the battlefield. These are families and young children in their house of worship, praying to God. ISIS is evil. Of that fact there is no doubt. And ISIS murderers are not going to paradise. They will be getting their reward in hell. On May 30th, in a particularly gruesome ISIS attack, a car bomb rips through an open market square next to an ice cream parlor. 31 are killed and over 100 injured in the 3-day attacks that day. Many are women and children. The very next day, in Kabul, Afghanistan, outside the German embassy, an ISIS bombing kills 90 and wounds 450. The scope of the bloodshed and its injuries is horrendous. ISIS has struck again, without mercy, yet with the conviction of a psychotic killer, who knows not of God, but who embraces the devil itself. 3 days later, on June 3rd, in London, England, a horrific scene unfolds. A group of 3 ISIS terrorists rent the van, only because they didn't have enough credit to rent a truck. And then they drive to the London Bridge, which is packed with sightseeing tourists, and they accelerate the van and start mowing down innocent people, until they crash the van. Then they jump out of the vehicle with 12-inch knives and start stabbing anyone they come up to. 8 are killed and 48 wounded. The very same day, in Kabul, Afghanistan, at a funeral, an ISIS bombing occurs and at least 12 people are killed. Ah, she sighs, so much evil, so much bloodshed, so much death. It seems the world is in a ceaseless conflict. What is happening to humanity, and when will this insanity ever end? As Pope Francis warned us, the world is in a new war, just like the great wars of I and II. The free Western world must understand that. Peace has been shattered by radicalism, and it is a radicalism of a worldwide religion, Islam. And the zealots of this extremism preach hatred of humanity and a commitment to a false god of death and destruction. They enjoin followers to a life of bondage of false doctrine and deceit. They command their followers to commit cold-blooded murder in the name of their God. The world must listen to and clearly hear what our enemy is saying to us. We must hear their words in their street protests from their terror leaders, echoed in their radical mosque by radical imams. We must hear them seeking unrestrained world domination and the imposition of Sharia law. And we must hear their zealousness for the destruction of freedom. And equally important, we must see their words turned into action. We must see their beliefs borne out before our eyes in the despicable horrors they are willingly commit. The terror, the bombings, the beheadings, the slaughter of innocent women and children, the torture and heinous executions of those who oppose their twisted beliefs, their deliberate killing of innocent Christians, one by one or in groups. We must fully comprehend what Islamic extremists, or whatever name they call themselves, ISIS, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, Haqqai, are aiming to do to us and the free world in executing their hatred. They don't want democracy. They don't want Western values of freedom. They don't want to honor human rights or the dignity of man. ISIS and all radical extremist Islamists have a hatred against humanity and God's children, and they are murdering in cold blood without a conscience or remorse. They are eagerly torching the defenseless in all manners of gruesome slaughter. They are not living by God's truths, nor by God's holy commandments, or by the true teaching of their holy book, the Quran. Instead, they are following the bloodlust of the devil and the devil's lies, and are doing the devil's evil upon humankind. What's next, you might ask? Jack Keane, a retired four-star general, former Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army, and widely recognized as a brilliant, honest, and straightforward military strategist, recently warned America the radical Islamists want nuclear materials for a dirty bomb, or worse. They are in pursuit of any weapon of mass destruction that they can get their hands on, and they have told us time and time again they will use it. It is entirely within the realm of possibility, and millions in seconds would die most horribly, with many more suffering with disease and radiation sickness for months and years afterwards. As a nation, we must recognize ISIS and like radical Islamic extremists for what they are. They are not of God. Instead, they are radical, satanic, and dangerous, and they want to destroy you, your family, your neighbors, and friends. In their ambitions, they are blind to God and bound to hatred. Another important institution within social and leadership is not a building or a group. It is a concept, a human construct. It is global stability, a requirement for human survival. Life cannot exist on this planet for very long if we destroy one another out of ignorance or pride or anger. Whatever threatens to destabilize the world is a threat to all life, and therefore a social force of greatest importance. If we were to take a moment and consider the conflicts going on around the world right now as you watch this video, you may be totally surprised to learn just how much of the planet is caught up in the turbulence of war and violence, the killing and murder of people in selfish, brutal hostility and strife. Peace is being destroyed as conflicts across the world rage, as nuclear arms and weapons of mass destruction proliferate into the hands of unstable regimes, as our world leaders squander time and intellect, as our national leadership dithers, wasting time on social justice issues of meager consequence, as opposed to the large issues of national existence. Take a look at the state of world conflicts. We are in the throes of major conflicts stretching across the world. Here's a map showing the countries where major to minor conflicts are occurring. The darker the color, the greater the number of deaths occurring in the current or past year. Dark red reflects major wars where 10,000 or more people have been killed. Bright red indicates wars in a country where 1,000 to 10,000 people have been killed. Orange are minor conflicts where 100 to 1,000 people have been killed in the last 12 months. And yellow are skirmishes where fewer than 100 have died. Here's the detail of wars which are ongoing and the size of the conflicts. These are just the big wars. In our daily lives, nested away in the relative safety of the United States, we are not generally aware of the types and numbers of conflicts going on. But as you can see, a lot of brutality and killing has occurred and is occurring somewhere out in the world. And here's the list of moderate conflicts where 100 to 1,000 lives have been killed in the past years. It's a long, sad list. There's a lot of cruelty and pain going on. We can't possibly go through every conflict with you, but a few are worth mentioning. The Syrian civil war is now a factor in the stability of the world. Initially, it started out a few years ago as a civil war within the nation. However, centered in the Middle East, bounded by Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, and the ISIS presence in the east of Syria, the civil war took on a greater dimension as the Assad government suffered serious defeats on the battlefield and lost control of nearly 2/3 of the nation. Many nations are now involved in one way or another, either aligned with the US or Russia. Those countries underlined in blue are with the US, and those underlined in red are aligned with Russia and Syria, including Iran and partially Lebanon. As you can see on the map, both the United States, France, Britain have a lot of naval power offshore of Syria in the Mediterranean Sea. Likewise, Russia has a fleet of ships there as well. In the Syrian war, the death total to date is generally recognized to be just under 500,000, perhaps some claim as high as 750,000, and the suffering has been beyond what reasonable hearts can bear, as innocent civilians, especially children, are caught in the barbaric aerial bombardments of explosives and chemicals. Sitting down before you is a 3-year-old Assyrian boy, just rescued from under the rubble of a building where family and relatives died. He was lucky to be alive, yet he is bloodied and sitting there in shock. His is the face of innocence, the face of many silent victims of war, and he's real, and he hurts, and he'll be scarred for life with the violent memories of his ordeal and the tragedy of the war he's been forced to live through. In Aleppo, over 31,000 people have been killed in the Syrian war. With over 4 years of fighting, the battle represents one of the longest sieges in modern warfare, almost a tenth of the overall Syrian war casualties. 23,604, or 76% of all fatalities, were civilians, while only 7,406, or 24%, were military deaths. 5,400 were children. Causes of death were explosions, 910, shelling, 6,384, field executions, 1,549, shootings, 9,438, warplane bombardments, 11,233, chemical and toxic gas attacks, 46, and others. As of February 2016, the United Nations has identified 13.5 million Syrians requiring humanitarian assistance, of which 6.6 million are internally displaced within Syria, and over 4.8 million are refugees outside of Syria. Turkey is the largest host country with over 2.7 million Syrian refugees. They come by land, they come by sea, they come by the tens of thousands, fleeing war and violence, the young and the old. They come to find a new life in Europe as they stream in by any possible means. Desperately they seek safe haven. Many drowned at sea in overcrowded, unseaworthy boats. Some are robbed and beaten, yet they brave it nonetheless, to find freedom and build a new life. The conflicts in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and those in Africa, Somalia, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Tanzania, Kenya, combined have swelled the ranks of refugees trying to get into Europe, a record 1.3 million in 2015, in total several million over the past decade. On this map, we show the refugee asylum-seeking population within each nation. The information is for the first half of 2015 only, yet it is indicative of the relative numbers accepted by each country. Also shown are the typical migratory routes, either through Turkey and into southeastern Europe, or from Libya into northern Africa, directly across the Mediterranean and into Italy, or from Tunisia over to Spain. Germany clearly has shown leadership within the European community on the migrant-refugee issue. The country, under Prime Minister Merkel's direction, has welcomed the refugees into their country, allowing up to 1 million to cross their borders and gain a chance for a new home in Germany. It's a noble gesture, yet fraught with risk. Angela Merkel comes under significant internal criticism for what she's encouraged. Many of the migrants are not vetted, as there's no way to properly vet them. ISIS boasts that they have planted hundreds of foot soldiers among the ranks of the immigrants, with instructions to bring terror into the European nations. Consequently, terror does materialize in Germany and elsewhere. In Germany alone, it's revealed migrants committed 142,000 crimes during the first 6 months of 2016. Although crime statistics have been criticized from both liberal and conservative circles for accuracy, especially as it relates to migrant refugees entering the German nation, there is a growing sentiment amongst the German politicians and citizens that crime has gone up, and the migrant refugees are the cause. In response, Angela Merkel is criticized for misleadership by political rivals, yet wildly recognized across the world for having courageously demonstrated real leadership in offering safe haven to the poor and homeless refugees. Global stability is subject to several potential flashpoints in the world, where war or peace is determined each week. As we mentioned, whatever threatens the world is a threat to all life, and therefore a social force of greatest importance. Here's a map of the world, and depicted are the major current geographic nations or areas, which represent a potential flashpoint for a major confrontation or war between several nations. Each area is in some state of instability, be it current conflict or a simmering conflict of interest. Each noted area in red could easily rupture into an armed conflict in that region, which, once started, could readily escalate by drawing in other nations into a global war. In almost every one of these active flashpoints, there are major national interests at stake, and typically there is a fundamental conflict of interest between the United States or NATO and one or more opposing nations. The United States provides global leadership and protection to other regions of the world for two basic reasons. First, if there's a U.S. national security interest at risk, the U.S. will act. Or second, as the protector of world democracy and free markets, the U.S. acts to protect other nations from aggressors that impose threats to democracies and their right to open international waters and free trade. Today, the big powers are determined by their military might and the possession of a significant number of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. The United States, Russia, and now China are the big world powers, mainly for their military might and their willingness to leverage that might to further their national objectives. It follows that in most flashpoint areas, the United States is in opposition either to Russia or China, or both of them, thereby heightening the danger and risk in any of these situations for catastrophic consequences. In the world, there are many reasons that feed the potential for future conflict in the flashpoint areas and elsewhere. These factors are variable in scale, geography, time, leadership, and unpredictability. And any country can, given the right condition, create the basis for existential conflicts. And for that reason, it is essential that the major nations have strong diplomatic capabilities, which enable them to talk things through, to plan, to negotiate, to cooperate, and to solve impasses through negotiation, compromise, and binding, yet fair and effective agreements. Another worrisome factor affecting global stability is nuclear proliferation, a deep and growing menace to the planet and all people. Unquestionably, it is the issue of increasing challenge, as the superpowers continue to maintain deadly arsenals aimed at one another, and rogue nations are advancing their capabilities in nuclear bomb capacity and delivery systems. The chart before you is based on 2015 statistics and shows by country who has nuclear bombs and approximately how many they have. Today, 9 countries have more than 23,000 nuclear weapons, all on a hair-trigger alert to launch and strike a perceived adversary on a moment's notice. And each country is constructing more or upgrading what they have to even greater legality. Some nations, like Iran, have constructed significant internal infrastructure to build and field a bomb in less than a year. they are most likely not alone. This chart depicts weapon counts for 2015 as well. It's just later in the year from the previous chart. You can see how the weapons inventories for several nations have climbed, and for the US and Russia have diminished due to arm control limits. We see growth in counts in the UK, plus 30, Pakistan, plus 20 to 40, and India, plus 10 to 30. The counts continue to change as each year passes, and countries continue to modernize their stockpiles. Even the US and Russia are now backing away from the limitation agreements which have been honored for many years, and their counts will be different. Nuclear proliferation has been difficult to contain by the post-World War II nations, who have managed their inventories of nuclear weapons with great care. These nations, the United States, Russia, Great Britain, and France, have for a decade maintained a peaceful coexistence despite contentions in different parts of the world, each knowing that any use of thermonuclear weapons would likely result in mutually assured destruction, in which nobody would win, and civilization would essentially end. The original nuclear powers as of the mid-1960s are outlined in blue, along with the year they joined the notorious nuclear club. The United States in 1945, Russia in 1949, the United Kingdom in 1952, France in 1960, and then Communist China in 1964. Just to demonstrate how proliferation has been going, outlined in yellow are the nations which became nuclear since then. Israel in 1971, unacknowledged to date. India in 1974, Pakistan in 1998, and now North Korea in 2006. And not shown is Iran, which has yet proven out its full capability. In Asia, the nuclear genie has bounded out of the bottle, as these Asian nations continue an aggressive buildup of their own warhead tallies. China, Pakistan, India, North Korea, building into their countries the most destructive force known to man. All of these Asian countries are generally located together, where the majority of our world population lives. Not but 50 years ago, these vast regions were free of nuclear weaponry. Now they are in the target zone of horror. A motivating factor behind much of the proliferation over the past 40 years has been the basic political contention between the United States and the communist nations of Russia and Red China. Since the Cold War, from the 1950s on, the United States has been facing down communist expansion throughout the world. Over those many years, other nations were also caught up in the web of fierce struggle between the free world and the dictatorships of the communist powers, where tyranny and atheism ruled the day. Also during this time, soft alliances between nations emerged. Wherever one superpower was seeking to gain strategic influence in a part of the world through alliance, artifice, secret dealings, and military partnerships. As examples, the United States and Israel was one, aiming to contain conflict in the Middle East. Russia and India, an example, containing China. China and Pakistan, a third, containing India. And then China and North Korea, a fourth, containing South Korea, the United States, and Japan. In each of these specific face-offs, tensions between rivals were volatile, and each side was looking for ways to improve their military advantage. Israel against its aggressive Arab neighbors, India and China disputing borders and arable land, India and Pakistan ideologically and religiously divided and warring, the United States and South Korea in a face-off with North Korea since 1954, and Russia and China in a Sino-Soviet tensions over several decades, each eyeing each other's military and economic growth and nuclear reach. And this tension led to each of these countries to seek advantage by somehow getting the bomb. Some intelligence analysts with exacting knowledge would argue that these nations were assisted in their efforts. You might say the process got greased by some of the original nuclear powers, either through clandestine exchange or strategic intent. One by one, the nations of India, Pakistan, North Korea gained the know-how and subsequently deployed a nuclear capability. And quietly, secret partnerships of assistance formed in the background between nations with dark mutual interest. Nuclear superpower states, leveraging off existing tensions, harnessed the inherent conflict in these sensitive parts of the world and established a form of client state to fit snugly into their strategic geopolitical calculus of extending power and influence. And they further strengthened these hidden relationships through military supply contracts lasting decades. Nuclear proliferation expands through client states of the existing world powers. Russia developed its relationship with India and their nuclear program. China, in turn, developed its nuclear relationship with Pakistan on India's flank. And eventually, China again strokes nuclear proliferation with North Korea in the east. North Korea, in turn, turns west and develops a relationship with an eager nation, Iran. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the nuclear genie is roaming around the world. Some maintain the United States did something similar with Israel. However, it is not the case. A nuclear exchange between the US and Israel did not occur, despite what some critics like to advance. The United States has been the world's vanguard and leadership point for stopping nuclear proliferation, especially in the Middle East. Israel developed her own nuclear capability, secretly working with the South African government. Unfortunately, the delicate balance of interest and the ability to control the nuclear genie is now more dangerous than ever. Today's bombs are not like the little ones used on Japan back in World War II. Instead, they are much larger and destructive, 20 to 1,000 times bigger, with enormous power to destroy cities and regions of a country in a single flash of atomic death. As more nations, out of paranoia, hubris, or the machinations of outside forces, develop their own capabilities to construct and deliver nuclear bombs against other nations and people, for whatever rationale they might have, be it nationalism or pride or nihilism. The threat of intentional or accidental use by miscalculation of atomic and fusion weapons is very serious and a building threat to our world. And as a result, we can say without doubt our global instability has dramatically expanded and will continue to expand given any more nuclear proliferation. We are faced with a real and immense risk to the use of our nuclear weapons occurring in the near future. While world leaders don't like talking about it, they know the risk of such an event has been heightened. Some experts would say it's near certainty, and the use of a nuclear weapon anywhere in the world would invariably trigger a greater thermonuclear response, perhaps escalating within hours into a worldwide calamity to all civilizations. For this reason, we emphasize nuclear weapons are and remain the single greatest threat to humanity's existence without exception. This completes Part 3 of Social and Leadership. Please continue on by going to 6D, Part 4.